Welcome to my presentation. It's about Eternity Consulting, the newest unit in the Eternity universe. I'm going to present the unit itself and a couple of use cases that we are thinking about and working on. First, about myself. I'm currently the head of Eternity Consulting. Why? Kind of what enabled me to do consulting for Eternity is I worked for 3.5 years for Roland Berger Strategy Consulting, which is Europe's biggest strategy consultancy to date. Before, I managed projects at Columbia University, a project with 50 researchers when I was a visiting researcher, and afterwards at Eve Sleep, which I joined when it had 8 employees, and then stayed till it IPO'd, and my part had 6 million euro annualized business within 2 years. So the question we are asking ourselves at Eternity, and as also Yanni mentioned it in the podcast and today's keynote, is adoption. Is how do we get Eternity adoption? Because we have, on the one hand, an amazing technology, but we need entrepreneurs, developers, companies who can adopt it. And for entrepreneurs and developers, we have resources like the documentation hub, like AE Ventures, that enable them and help them to start a business or to start working with the Eternity protocol. For the company side, we cannot ask them to say, hey, visit our documentation hub, find out yourself how to use it. We need to help them to develop dApps, develop real-life applications that they use. And their users basically then will also be part of the Eternity network through user adoption then. So what is Eternity Consulting in detail? Basically, we are going into companies and tell them, and analyze their certain situation and try to find use cases where they either have better efficiency in their processes, so process optimization, where they have additional revenue in their current business models, or which enables completely new business models that weren't possible without blockchain. So in the end, it really is all about when we come in, because we are also, as any other consultancy, we are charging fees. So the fees should have for them a positive ROI. So by bringing us in, they pay at the beginning, but they have so much higher efficiency or more revenues that it pays for itself. So what's the process? Basically, we're employing a 4-step process where at the beginning we meet with the client and say, have a 1-day workshop, and in general, based on their industry and based on an initial phone call where their challenges are, what they want to explore, we suggest them, we introduce them to blockchain, introduce them to Eternity blockchain, and then suggest them multiple use cases that would work. Always, of course, together with the client. In our next step, we have, which would run usually a month, we talk about which of these multiple use cases is the one that can actually be implemented and which is the one that will bring the most value for the customer. Once you go in and test IT systems or test processes, not all use cases that you discussed on at the beginning will deliver as much value as you initially thought, because the moment you start working in depth with a client, well, it's IT and it's people, you will find that which part of those use cases or which use case is the most valuable. Then the next step is to deliver a prototype with where you have in a certain smaller case, a prototype is being developed so that personnel or people who might be reluctant to use blockchain technology at the beginning might say, well, wasn't it all a hype? Does it really bring any value to the organization? That they can see for themselves that it really has a positive impact. And then also we can, with an initial prototype, we can then start thinking about what does it mean for the processes? How do those processes have to be adapted, and start a change management process? And if this all goes well, and you have a bigger buy-in in the organization, we can start to work on a company-wide adopted version of the prototype, which is then again kind of a much bigger and larger project, which will then, depending of course kind of on the size, can run from several months to a year, and which then kind of results in the production-ready solution. Of course, some clients that we talk to, they have actually a very concrete use case in mind, especially if they themselves are very interested in technology, so it's not kind of a must to go through this process. So with some, we go right away into the prototyping stage because they have a very specific process where it absolutely makes sense to use blockchain, and then they use basically our expertise to get this done. And why it's interesting is, and why then they work together, is that we have a senior team of first developers, which have been working for now up to 3 years. Some of them who came from other projects up to 10 years or 8 years on blockchain. So we can draw on various resources. And so here to name a couple, so Pablo is sometimes involved on the business side, but then with Keno and Philip, we are having several client discussions. The good thing is also they work very well in teams where one person is the front end, the other person does the back end. So we kind of deploy teams that can then handle a full project on their own. Nikita and Sergey also helped me for some client discussions. And this is where we come. So what are the competitive advantages of Eternity Consulting? Because there's certainly a lot of consultancies out there that either have a genuine interest and generally develop capabilities in the blockchain space, or some of them who kind of jumped on the bandwagon, say, yes, we do have it, and then kind of try to figure out later why or how kind of to really carry out the project. We think we have a blockchain protocol that can deliver, in the end, great value for the client, which has all the state-of-the-art technologies, and with like some very leading features like state channels, like first layer protocols, and of course the Fate machine, if you've seen it, that just by design protects you from certain types of attacks or failures in the design of the smart contracts. But in addition, as I said, we can draw upon a very large number of very experienced developers, so we can really deploy the exact skill set that is needed for a certain project. And last but not least, because all our developers and our business developers, they work on other projects as well, we don't have basically a cost structure where people who don't have a project, but I mean still like are your full-time employees, that basically that a client with paying the fees pays also idle time of employees whenever there's no project, because we don't have this these idle times, we basically are able to offer a different cost structure, which makes it cheaper for the client to use our services. So here are a couple of use cases that are at the moment very interesting for corporate adoption, but also for public adoption, so governments. One thing is supply chain, and it's to have the traceability and the transparency to know where your goods are at a certain time. And there is, the good thing is, sometimes I hear, well, but I mean, you could track something along the whole supply chain, but who can guarantee you that what's inside wasn't replaced somehow? There are also solutions for that. Interestingly, exactly like with cryptography, you can add certain pieces in miniature size, which are actually, if you produce them, which are very, very cheap. But if you want to find out what those pieces are and recreate them, it is very, very difficult and very expensive. So basically, exactly the same way you work in cryptography, to check whether it's the right marker, it's very cheap. To develop the marker or redevelop it on your own, it's very expensive. Then the second is financial services with smart contracts to have automatic payouts and just a much more efficient process with insurances or intercompany payments is another use case many corporates are exploring at the moment. The third one is marketplaces. We talked already about Dex. Luca mentioned it, that decentralized exchanges are very interesting, and they can be also used in corporate environments. Then you have identity management, especially like around the car industry, to really be able to tell that's the car, that's what happened to the car, this is the mileage of a car. Already solutions in this area can save, for example, in Germany, several billion euros, just because people are still changing odometers, for example. Last but not least, you can of course combine then these various distinct these distinct areas, and where they're most combined is of course in government, because you have such a wide array what government institutions are covering, and so this is where you have identity management mixed with financial management and automatic payouts or automatic approvals. So this is also an area, by the way, where Liechtenstein is also spearheading with cardossier.ch and Dr. Otto Frommelt, who works there. So it's not only regulation, it's really kind of the whole application side, where actually Liechtenstein is also very strong. Thanks a lot.
Okay, do we have some questions? Okay, one. There we go.
Hi, Helmut. Really nice to see what you're doing there. I'm interested if you're targeting some specific industries or with the consulting services.
So at the moment we are not industry specific. We do think that a lot around the automotive industry and governments is really, really interesting for us. It's so these are kind of the most what we look at. We have looked a little bit into supply chain, but automotive and governments, I personally think are very interesting. Governments here is, if you look at where at the moment the whole the blockchain applications are moving, is a lot towards decentralized autonomous organizations, or just automation of processes, like with this immutable layer and the additional trust. And then if the government itself runs such an app, what actually happens is that not only do you have trust maybe between a company and yourself, but with the regulator on board, you have efficiency improvements that are higher than when you have just a company basically that's integrated. Because always when you have a regulator, they have actually quite a lot of resources, or put quite a lot of resources into that they verify that what's happening is really happening and it's this person. And blockchain can help you, whereas kind of a car probably doesn't really care who this person is, they just want to sell, whereas a regulator does. And with blockchain, you can identify yourself, you can automatize it, and the state can still trust that everything that's happening, even without human interaction or intervention or oversight, is correct.
Okay, we have a question up.
Just out of curiosity, and to get a bit more concrete, what's the case you're most excited about and you think where aeternity comes into place and solves most of the problems, like very concrete?
Yeah, so I think kind of like most of the problems, this would be basically a very large application. It's at the moment what you look at real life applications that are being implemented is basically solving certain processes where, for example, you're having two parties, and again, government is a good example where you have an entity that's not in the government but maybe certified by it, and then they have to exchange certain paperwork, and someone, so like the external partners send something to the government, and then they have to send back that yes, we received it, and sort of we checked that it's approved. You could completely automatize this process by using blockchain, and then you would have it would be much faster, because you at the same time you also eliminate the paperwork, and would be much more efficient because you eliminate the person on the government side sitting and checking it.
Hi, Jason Eisen from Utu. My question is, as one of the AE Starfleet companies, and probably I can speak for some of the other Starfleet companies, we have services that we offer that are infrastructure services that are core to multiple sectors. How does a Starfleet project work with Eternity Consulting to maybe integrate some of the products that we've built and services that we've built for some of the clients that you guys are developing? Because just from your presentation, I see a bunch of areas where maybe your clients could benefit from some of our work. Is there something like this that you guys are working on to integrate Starfleet programs?
So like a specific use case was, so Deutsche Bahn, for example, they're looking into how smart contracts can help them in steering basically construction projects, because the construction industry is again very manual, very complicated, but at the same time on the planning side they produce first a digital twin of the plan, and then out of the digital twin you get a breakdown of processes and goods that are needed. And then what you could do is, one example would have been CryptoTask. You would attach to it one of our Starfleet projects, say, hey, look, you have a direct link to CryptoTask. You could have it as a CryptoTask solution. You could have it as a white label solution. So whenever we see a project that falls in there, we contact the Starfleet Ventures and cooperate with them. If you have something where you say, wow, I didn't know that there's Eternity Consulting, but actually we always wanted to approach company clients, or we think that would be very relevant, please come to me, and we'll set something up.
Just to follow up, yeah, we're working with some insurance companies and banks and lending companies, which seems like fits with you guys. So I'm curious, are those sectors that you've already started working in, insurance and banking?
So we are talking with there are two big German banks, with one of the two at the moment. And we are interested to get into it. There are certain legal questions that we are solving at the moment, which are really related to AML, KYC. But basically, yes, once we have that solved, we are very interested, and we are also pitching to, as I said, to this bank, and we have contacts in there that are quite interested in Eternity technology.
Hi, Stefan here from AMP Workshop, Blockchain R&D Studio. When you do consultancy for projects, are you approaching them like any other product development consultancy, like regardless of blockchain, or are you immediately starting with having the blockchain tech stack in mind?
What we are trying to do is to find those people within an organization that are thinking about blockchain. We are not a consultancy that offers additional IT services. So what basically the approach is on client acquisition is we are members of certain blockchain associations, meeting people there. We are going a lot of on talks and meetups, and then look at who was interested to work with us, and then we start developing ideas and use cases with them. In the end, if we see that something is going, or that they have a different need, a need that can't be solved with blockchain, then we do have consultancies, we work together, and then basically pull them in the picture and say, bring them in the picture so that they can then start developing the client or helping the client, because our goal is, is to adopt blockchain, but our goal is, of course, you can only do this when you have happy clients, because if you sell them something that doesn't work out, that rumor spreads. So we rather give it to consultancies we know and we work well together with, that then they come back and take us as their trusted advisor. So this is basically, yes, we have a very blockchain, a strong blockchain focus, but we are not trying to use blockchain when there is no need for blockchain. These projects will fail so fast, there's no need. That doesn't make sense.
You mentioned the business model is not to employ people, so just a really pragmatical question, how do you handle operations? I assume there are extended lead times, because when people have other priorities, other projects, how do you manage the workloads? Are clients still happy to wait longer because blockchain is still new? Will we have to adapt to, let's say, the classical model where we have to have dedicated people in order to be able to respond quickly and so on?
So Eternity has 70 to 80 developers, and we work in sprints. Not everything kind of finishes at the same time, so we have some flexibility there. It's then, in addition, usually you have quite some time before, in between your first pitch and when it's becoming more and more concrete. Here we see that there is really enough time usually for the people in the pitches to participate just in the first discussions with the client, to take, for example, this initial workshop that we were talking about, where you have this initial workshop where they take one day off from their from their task, feature task at Eternity, and go with me with my colleagues to present and discuss with the client. And then, usually we then see how fast they go, but also the client usually has to prepare that we arrive at their site. So this gives us enough time to really draw on resources. In addition, Aeternity Consulting has a high priority at Aeternity in the entire Aeternity project and ecosystem. So we can flexibly draw those people and bring them in when the client needs it, and not when some feature of us is fully developed.
Just to follow up to that, so but the mention that you actually do also production-ready projects, right? And the time frames of several months to a year, that will pull out resources which won't be able to continue to develop the platform, right? So are you using external resources on projects like that, where you have to build the full suite and not just the prototype initially?
So no, we will always draw on resources that are trained on Aeternity technology and have been with us for quite some time. There's certainly there will be the case that a feature might not be, might be kind of drawn out a little bit, but you have to see that. Even if we say, okay, we want to have a production-ready system, we employ 4 developers there because we need it. It's still, percentage-wise for Aeternity, it's still a much smaller scope. Again, and it takes longer till you arrive there, so you can do some precautions. We also have, when you look at it in our kind of ecosystem, with people who work with us, but then go to a different project, then come back. We have some of those. So in the case that, assumingly we draw a lot of resources, we also have people who worked on Aeternity and could come back to Aeternity.
Okay.
But also, to say, at the beginning, kind of for the prototype, it makes a lot of sense to work much more with our application developers, not with the core team. Again, the application developers are many, many more people. Whereas later, yes, for the production ready, it might make sense to have a dual team, some kind of core developers and some from the application side. But then it wouldn't be that we take out 4 of core developers and then everything takes much longer. For maybe one last word, I think when you look at it, kind of what would be the most beneficial way for Aeternity, and the most beneficial way for Aeternity is not to have technology focus only. There should be some adoption, and the company-wide adoption that you're talking about that would take so many resources would also be a huge step for Aeternity adoption-wise, and would draw so much attention, so that we think the benefit would there outweigh any frictions within the feature development of Aeternity.
Thank you very much, Helmut.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for the great questions.